The year the year is 2050 in the United States of America. What does it look like? What has happened in the last 2 decades? This is a message from the future. Consider me a time traveler, if you will. So, in the timeline between 2016 and about 2030 was the era of Trump. So this was the period of time where Trumpism took hold. Something a lot more pervasive than just one man. This was well beyond one man. Trump was merely a catalyst to something that was already burning, and he just put a lot of fuel on that fire. But it burned for quite some time. So between 2016 and about 2030, basically, because this is beyond Trump, so I'm gonna call it MAGA. MAGA took over the GOP. In this version of the party, they went from the old school fiscal conservatism and small government, all this kind of stuff, family values, to what was essentially a troll party. They were essentially a party of social media influencers, not unlike where the Democratic Party went around this time in terms of the influencer part, but the troll party part, not so much. Democrats can't get away with that from their voters, but the Republicans, for whatever reason, were able to find a healthy base that tolerated the nonsense. But eventually what ended up happening was the MAGA squad basically completely took over the GOP. So it became completely normalized to have someone who was friends with a child sex trafficker, going around talking about how he doesn't take small money donations and virtue signaling about some anti-corruption bill that he knew wasn't going to get passed, and just usual antics, running a podcast. That became normalized, right? But eventually, once it became normalized, it sort of lost its appeal, right? And also, some of the Republican voters in time started to wake up and realize that these people were a bunch of clowns and weren't really doing much for them. It was really just about themselves and power and theatrics and trying to get views and trying to get followers. That was how things were when, MTG and Matt Gaetz and, all those types of people were the norm. Boebert, like when they became the norm in the party, after a while, the Republican base kind of got numb to it all. So whatever games that they were playing in back and forth, it just didn't have the effect that it used to back in, the 2016 to 2026. So this entered a new era, which got us to the future of the American right wing in the year 2050. This is what happened. Basically, as the Republican base became disillusioned with all these sort of clowns and all the games and all that kind of stuff, they started not turning out to vote as much. Republicans started losing more and more elections. And this opened up the door of opportunity to a new wave of GOP politicians. Basically, what happened was, as bad as the MAGA people were, there started to emerge a new group of Republican politicians who were far more, let's just say, horrible. People that make Matt Gaetz and MTG and Boebert look like, mild in comparison. They started with this rhetoric. So they saw that the base was getting disillusioned and they weren't as motivated to come out to vote. So they started this rhetoric about how, basically calling out these MAGA people, MAGA is a joke and this and that. And, that's the old Republican Party. And, Trump made all these promises and he didn't deliver. And remember, they said they were going to do this and then they didn't do it. And they said they were going to secure the border. And here we are in the year 2040 and the border's still not secure. These people are clowns. They're not serious. They're just influencers. So you had this breed of new Republican politicians who actually were calling out the old guard, the old MAGA guard, right? At this point, this is old school, right? Calling them out for their corruption, calling them out for their lies, calling them out for their games, right? And saying, you need to vote for us. We're going to take over the party. We're the real Republicans, and saying we're going to really secure the border. Only in order for them to get attention, they needed to be far more extreme than the MAGA squad. So unlike the MAGA squad who would, when you say stuff about, oh, you're fascist, they would play the game of, yeah, we're fascists, trying to, sort of mocking it and trying to downplay it. This new breed of Republican politicians were openly. So MAGA sort of softened things up. They pushed the what is it called? I forgot the political spectrum in terms of what is acceptable. I forget the term. Someone will tell me below. But the Overton window, they pushed it even more extreme. MAGA pushed it so extreme that it now made it, decades later, okay for a Republican politician to overtly say that they support fascism in a similar light to the way back in the day it became normalized to say that we're pushing for, was it Christian nationalism? Back in the day, to say something like that would have been like, oh my goodness, right? But after the MAGA generation, what happened was basically the new breed of Republican politicians were now openly saying that they're fascists and fascism is the way to go. They created an argument of the reason why the borders are not secure, the reason why MAGA failed, the reason why all these things are happening is because we have all these restrictions. President gets in office and then he's got this other party that's blocking him and this and that. You need a leader that has nothing in the way, that they can get in and do what they need to do. You get into power, you secure the border, you lock this down, you ban whatever. You basically get the job done without all of this democratic nonsense, right? At this point in the future, decades after MAGA, it was now okay to openly say that you are fascist and fascism is the way to go. Right? You openly point out other countries that have this type of government and how efficiently they function, where the leaders get stuff done, right? They don't have all this stuff blocking. And then in America, it's Congress this and this and that and debates and all this kind of back and forth, and this new breed of Republicans actually started to get, success. They started, the base started to get lit up and they were like, yeah, this is what we need to do. And that's the solution. We need a leader that's not going to be blocked by this nonsense. And so in the year 2050, you had a bunch of far more corrupt, far more extreme Republicans who would openly go out and talk about they want to get into power so they can get rid of the swamp. And swamp they're referring to is MAGA. So let me explain to you what happened in the year 2050. This is 2045, 2050. You had a bunch of people that make MAGA look like a choir, who are talking about how corrupt MAGA is, and MAGA is nothing but a bunch of liars and scammers, and Donald Trump was a huckster and all this kind of stuff. And that's the kind of stuff that you could say in 2040. By that time, people had gotten over Trump. There was a new person that came after him. That's for another day. But so they were saying, call out MAGA. MAGA is corrupt. But meanwhile, they were more corrupt, and the base fell for it. The base actually fell for it. The Republican base, who were frustrated with the MAGA squad and all their failures and all the nonsense, all the theatrics, they were out there saying, you know, we got to drain the swamp. I mean, they didn't use that word anymore, but basically saying the same kind of thing, the same kind of rhetoric, you know. History repeats itself, right? So the modern Republican base were out there motivated by the idea of draining the MAGA swamp, the old guard, the old Trump huckster guard. But to replace them with what? Far more corrupt and extreme politicians, right? The new guard of the Republican Party, who are openly calling for fascism because the MAGA generation softened up the base enough that they could accept the idea of fascism. Somehow there was an argument made where it makes sense. Look at all the gridlock in Congress, blah, blah, blah. And that is basically the Republican Party in 2050. Frustrated with the corruption of the Republican Party, voting for the next generation of far more corrupt politicians because they're just so sort of tunnel vision, just focused on how corrupt things used to be, not realizing they're now supporting a new generation of far more corrupt politicians. Now, for those of you living in the past, in the year 2024, listening to this through time, understand that what happened in 2050 is currently happening now. You have a new generation of far more corrupt people who basically have no standards, who are speaking the truth about how corrupt the old guard was. The old Republican Party was corrupt, right? They were not for we the people. They're talking the truth about how bad the old guard is, but they're using that as a distraction to get you to vote for them and support them, not realizing that they are far worse than the old guard that they are supposedly here to save you from. So continue on your path, and what happened in 2050 is what is going to happen in the year 2024, around that time, right? You're going to let these far more corrupt people focus on the truth about how bad the old guard was. And while your back is turned, right, listening to them, oh yeah, the old school Republican Party, you need to get rid of them, you won't realize how much worse they are than the ones that they are supposedly opposed to, right? Like listen to Matt Gaetz talking about, you know, oh, all the swamp creatures are retiring. Right. They're retiring to open the doors to a new Republican Party where a guy who used to hang out with a child sex trafficker is able to win elections easily, right? Old school Republican Party, the old guard, the corrupt old guard, that would not be allowed. There's no way back in the Reagan days you could be friends with a child sex trafficker and easily win an election. That would be political suicide, right? So again, they're replacing a corrupt old guard with a far more corrupt new guard, and they'll do it again in another 20 years. Hey, Thomas, good to see you. Good to see you, Nadir. I don't know whose message got held for review. Let's see who that is. Yes, I am a time traveler. That is true. The banana says, you look like Mike Tyson. I don't know about that. Lol, yeah, he does. I don't know about that, man. Somebody else got held for potentially inappropriate messages. All right, let's see what's the inappropriate message. By the way, the slipstream is breaking down, so this transmission may be disabled unfortunately. It takes a lot of power for me to transmit through time. And also, my flux capacitor is having issues lately. Something about I don't know. The professor says the gauge of wire that I use is not appropriate for the amount of power that we're putting through the system, but who knows? I'm not the one who built the time machine, so. Another moderator. Okay, somebody already did it. Okay, cool. What the fuck are you saying? Banana. What I'm saying to you is that the banana was clearly designed to fit in a human hand. All right, on that note, I'm out, guys. I got to go back to 2050 because 2024 is boring. All right, guys, I'm out.